For Mother Earth.
지구를 위해서.
Für Mutter Erde.
Pela Mãe Terra.
Heard around the world, welcome to the Rock Talk podcast with your host, Dave Stein.
All right, so I'm here with Wendell Barker, and he is a geologist from up north from Alaska, and he will be out here on with us today talking about just a little bit of his career and kind of some tips and tricks to get along and some professional development. Wendell, can you want to start off by giving us just a quick brief introduction about, just who you are exactly and what your expertise has been?
My name is Wendell Barker, and I am the owner of two companies. I'm owner of Mogombe Mountain Mining and Exploration Corporation, and also SignTech, both Alaska corporations. And I've been mining in the mining industry for over 42 years now, almost 43. And I've been doing it since actually before then. And School of Agriculture and Mining and geology and actually mining engineering, and then out in the bush, and then here I am.
Okay, nice. Yeah, that's awesome. It sounds like you've got quite the career going so far. So I guess my first question is, what made you want to get into mining and geology?
Well, my whole background, my whole life has been around people. My grandfather on my mother's side, for an example, he was, during World War II, he was a physicist, and he was also a electronics engineer, and he worked out in New Mexico during World War II on the projects out there, and then he later on worked with the ICBM guidance systems and such like that. And as I was growing up as a little boy, he would take my brothers and I out to the shop, and he would have us sit down at his desk, and he'd dump little jars of different size screws and everything out, and we were to put them in the proper jars. And while we were doing that, he would be reading to us novels such as Robert Heinlein or John Carter of Mars, and then we would also have time of Torah study, and we did many things like that together. But always he was inventing something, and he was always making fun things for us and showing us how to make these toys. That after I grew up, I realized that they didn't do anything but bloop and bleep and light up lights, and that was about the extent of it, but it was pretty fun. And he always inspired all of us to go forward and think about things outside the box. And I got into geology and mining, and went mining with the thought in mind that he always told us that in the Torah it says when God created the heavens and the earth, well, it says in the Torah that God spoke or resonated the world and the elements into existence. And I always found that to be really a mystery of this particular thing. And then I got into the elements and element, valence and finding out about chlorides and sulfides and all these other things, and how they want to bond together, and how they want to continue growing their structures by their adding more and more and more elements to the mess, you might say, and how the heat and electricity and sometimes water did quite a bit in the forming of the earth and in the rocks and things around me, and I was very interested in that type of thing. And so when I had a chance when I was a young lad to go out in the bush, I graduated high school at 15, and my friend's dad was a gold miner out in the bush in Alaska. I grew up in Fairbanks, and it was funny because I went out there and my parents had no idea of where I was all summer long, and we didn't have anything in the bush, so I stayed out there, and that is where I really started looking into the mysteries of how all of this placer mining came about and how to follow the channels, and when you find deposits of purple clay or red clay and the type of and amount of gold you get in each of these little areas, and finding some really interesting diorite reefs and dikes that have been exposed by the alluvial streams, and it was very interesting. So that's what got me started, and then I mined ever since then. But in the meantime, I wasn't just satisfied with the basic mining, because back then, this is a long time ago, we had a 50-foot long tom with 4-inch riffles and cocoa mat made out of coconut husks, and we just had to block up this dam overnight so that we could run for the day, and we had gravity feed on the water and everything else, and it was just a mess. But since then we've started getting into recirculation and settling out our settling ponds and moving forward and advancing in our industries, and I always remembered my grandfather said resonating the elements into existence as we know it. And so I started working on resonance frequencies as a sideline, and that's what got me into the company that I have now, SignTech. I have a patenting on this machine that actually uses a similar resonance frequency to gold, and it's a wonderful thing to see it in action, because we have one on the cleanup box, and you can see the microscopic fine particulates building up right over top of this ultrasonic, I call it the gold magnet, but it sits right on top of it. Even though the water is washing all the other lighter material that isn't within the range, I can dial in the range from gold and platinum and silver, and I've captured all of these in the magnet there, and it uses ultrasonic frequency, and underneath of the little cleanup box, and it works similar to a table, except for the table has a lateral movement, and my mechanism has a vertical movement, and it holds the gold in place rather than just working it out into the little channels like on the tables. And I improved it several times over. I've seen what needed to be advanced further, and things that could be taken out, and this this is a process that took me about 15 years to get to where it's at now. And right now, I'm in the area of business, you might say, where I need customers.
Yeah, that's at least always a good business to be in. Yeah, it's very interesting. So you said, back when you were only 15, just started going out in your first experience out there?
Yes.
What was that like, being such a younger male going out into the wilderness, just kind of being out all by yourself out there?
Well, there was a camp, and we had a camp cook, and the camp cook and her husband was he was an old cat skinner, and he had worked on the big gold dredges there around Fairbanks, and he kind of took us under his wing and showed us the variations of a theme on how to operate the equipment and what to look for when we're out there. And he had been, since he was a young lad, he had been out in the bush in Alaska and working, and it was quite exciting because we were allowed to, as a matter of fact, my first bulldozer out there was an old Caterpillar 2U, which is about the size of a D8, and it said D8 on the side, but it was actually smaller than the modern D8s, but it had a gasoline starting motor, and then you start that up and pull these different levers and start the diesel engine up. There was no turbine on the diesel engine. All it was just compression, and you had a cable going through a tube, and you pull this lever and pull that lever, and it weighed about 120 pounds. By the end of the summer, I went up to about 150 pounds muscle, and it was quite interesting. But that was where I got started, and I really have not stopped in this business. I've mined in Central America, South America, and Alaska, and I've been all over Canada and places, but I've always come back to Alaska.
Oh, where it started. Now, just for everybody else who doesn't know, what exactly is the bush? Give them a quick description if you could.
Well, when I was young, we had a modern house that had electricity, it had heat and everything else, but I could get on my snow machine and ride about 2 miles and be in the bush. The bush is, you might say, it's anywhere where there aren't many roads or there's not modern conveniences such like that, or anything off-road. Alaska, there's quite a bit of wilderness, and the bush is your closest neighbor may weigh about 800 pounds and have size 13 feet. and teeth, and he might have a penchant for fresh meat. I don't know. There's also moose and caribou and fox, but my mother had a moose in our backyard, and she'd go out there in the wintertime and pet it and sometimes give it carrots, but it was quite the experience growing up. And then the bush nowadays still means the same thing. It's anything that's off-road. You can be on a paved highway in Alaska and walk 20 feet off to the side there. You'll still hear the noise, but you'll see fox and moose and caribou and everything. It's the wilderness, and good thing there's no snakes, but other than that, it's quite peaceful.
What would you say is your most exciting or crazy experience that you had while you were out there on one of your adventures?
Well, I'd say the craziest time I had ever had was actually with my brother, my middle brother, and we were down fishing, and I told my brother, I said, the creek, actually, it's a river, but the river was in a little bit of a flood stage, and you could see the swells, and I said, there's a moose over there across the river, and he looks up from his fishing, and no, there's not. And then I said, there's a calf over there, and he says, no, there's not. And just within a few minutes, here comes Mama and the calf, not 10 feet from my brother, and she shakes all the water off on us. And we turn around, there she is, and my brother goes, ah! And so we went back up to our parents, and he grabs his camera, and I come running back down with my pistol, and I wasn't going to shoot the moose, but I just didn't want. I wanted to shoot into the ground and scare the moose off, and I come walking around the willows there, and I saw the moose nose to nose, and I screamed, and she turned the other way. Well, my brother was out there in the little clearing, and he was taking pictures of the moose and the calf, and the last picture he got was of the moose's belly.
Oh, wow.
And over him, and that was pretty fun. But I have to say that was one fun example, but a lot of times the most amazing experiences have been when I've been mining and working a particular cut. In the cut, we're seeing different layers as they layer out, and then panning it and putting it through the sluice box, and then having a cleanup and finding a 5-ounce nugget. That's excitement.
I can imagine. So what was the biggest find that you have ever found while you were out there? Or what was your best season?
The best find was the 5-ounce nugget, but in that particular season, it was the summer before my son was born, and that was 1,800 ounces in 4 weeks.
Wow. Okay. And how long is a season typically last for you guys out there?
Well, for one example, 4 years ago, in April, because they had so many volcanoes blast off and they burped. They weren't really big volcanic problem, but there was like 16 of them burped at the same time, and in April 5th, it was 85 degrees in Fairbanks. And that's not a typical year, but we normally get started in that time repairing equipment, getting stuff ready to go, and then it starts. We start solution around May, middle of May, sometimes 5th or 6th of May. It all depends, and then we go till freeze up, and that's sometimes in October. This last year we had a freeze up for just a few short days, and then there was an Indian summer, if you will, and it warmed up quite a bit, and it's been a nice winter. When Kansas was getting all the Arctic air.
Okay, and I guess a lot of people, have seen these gold rush, gold mining shows now that are all popular on like the History Channel and stuff like that. And I know a lot of people, when I asked them that I was going to talk to you, one of the questions they continuously asked me was, is gold mining still really a thing these days? And so I'm just curious on your takes on that. Now, I myself have understand, like there's still a huge market, especially with all the mines around the world that are producing. But I just would like to hear the perspective of somebody who's actively working in the industry on what they would say to that question.
Well, actually, it's kind of funny. Back in, I would say, back in the early 80s, 84, 85, the government came out with all of these regulations and all these permitting and everything else. And back then, in the district where I was working, there was probably 1,800 miners in the area, and there was probably about 700 mining companies active before all the government regulations. And then when they started coming out, they started really hammering people with all these regulations. And then once people started realizing that the regulations were easy enough to get past, if you understood the permitting system, and some of the stupidest permits actually went by the wayside. They were kind of like the Clean Water Act and all this other stuff, because we had back in the day, like I said, we'd use gravity feed and just flushing all of our tailings out and push our tailings up into a pile, but we didn't have any settling ponds or anything. And I have another device that not only is the gold magnet, but I have a device that I'm promoting more in the mining industry that will help more miners, is because, in placer mining, the cleaner the water, the more gold you actually capture. And so if you can settle your settling pond out quicker, some people have 4 or 5 settling ponds before the recirculation pond, and if you can settle it out quite quickly, then you're able to move about and use clean water. So I have this machine that uses the vibrations, and it sits in a inner tube, if you will, and it sits there and vibrates the water and settles out all the solids and with ultrasonic vibrations. But anyway, we're more and more miners are actually starting to come back, the small miners, mom and pop miners, and that's where I got my start at. And we're also seeing a lot of the big miners coming in, but there are quite a few mining companies, 4 or 5 guys, or actually families sometimes, husband and wife. I knew several of them, and they mine by themselves, and they do pretty good. And there's a lot more information out there. The University Extension has placer mining groups that you can get with, and they'll put you with a mentor, and the mentor will lead you into what placer mining is all about. And it's, I know some of the gold miners on the mining show, and Tony Beats in Canada, for one. He's actually a gold miner, and he's pretty sharp at it. And Parker, he's pretty sharp. But Todd Hoffman, the earlier Gold Rush, he wasn't that sharp, and so he did what he knew best. He went back to singing, I guess. And
So how long did it take you to come up with your device, the ultrasonic device, to capture the gold, and then also what got you thinking about how to utilize that type of technology for the settlement ponds?
Well, when you think about a little conversation that we had off a couple days back, where we were talking about some of our lightning strikes and everything else, and some of my papers that I had done earlier in my life were concerning the lightning goes through the ground, and then it bolts up through this to the sky. You have air to air, ground to air, and then you have ball lightning. Well, the lightning has to have a positive and a negative no matter what it does. And we know that because of certain chemicals, like I said before, sulfides and chlorides, for example, they tend to grab onto other things, like sodium chloride, and we have potassium chloride. Those things grab hold, and the electrical discharges through the earth as they're traveling along, they contribute to all the other factors, the heat from the the magma chambers and everything that we're looking at, and they help move along the currents, and they settle other things out. And when you see the static when you're taking off frozen muck, for example, there's static in your hair when you get up there and you're in the midst of all that. You'll notice that your hair kind of stands on end, like in a Tesla coil type of situation, and it has a sine wave, and everything has a sinus or a sine wave to it, and as you put the mechanism down in the inner tube and you turn it on, that sine wave has a sine length. The length of it is 1 meter long at certain frequencies. So that frequency doesn't just stop at the end of that 1 meter. It continues on until the edge of the settling pond. And as it's going about, it creates a positive wave, you might say, that keeps away the oxygenation of the particulates that are in the water. And you'll see little bubbles on top of the water, and that's just oxygen going out. And as the material is flowing through the sluice box, it picks up air as it goes over top of each riffle, and it whips it up and it foams it up. And then as it comes out into the settling pond, each little particulate releases its. When it hits that wave, it hits that wave and it drops off its oxygen molecules, and away it goes. It starts going back to the bottom. And I hope that was as clear as mud.
Yeah. No, I mean, it sounds very interesting. It sounds like you ended up coming up with something that's pretty great. And I know in one of our prior discussions, you had mentioned that it could be potentially utilized to end up helping clean stuff out of the water as well, possibly?
Yes, I have other things that I've been working on over the years. Pollutants, for example. One of the pollutants that is very bad and very bad for the environment and everything else is a pollutant called PCB, polychlorinated butyl. In a butyl, you have a carbon atom with 4 valence, external, 2 internal, and it picks up hydrogen molecules, and they have a combination there where they join together, but they always join together in the butyl, 4 on the side of a carbon molecule. And then you have the butyl there, and that it can be excited to the point with pressure and stimulation. And one of the main things about the ultrasonic, depending on the frequency, you can have up to 17,000 psi of cavitation, and that is quite a bit of cavitation. If you could get it all in one cavitating bubble, 1 cubic inch there, you could probably crush my car.
Wow.
And it would it creates enough pressure in the matrix, and the matrix would be the water, or you could have other factors in there. But let's say you have a bay that has PCBs on the bottom of the bay down there. You send down a suction dredge type of deal, and it starts suctioning with a little rover type of underwater device, and it goes over there so that you don't have to have a diver near the pollutants, but you can go back and forth and suck up the little puddles of this PCBs, because they have a tendency to drop down into the bottom of the water and such, and you suck them up, and as they're going through there, you're getting a little bit of salt water as well. So you already have sodium chloride in the salt water of the bay, and you have polychlorinated butyls. You want some of those, the chlorine or the chlorinated portion, to jump over onto that salt, because you don't want it to be attached to the carbon molecule, but you want it to be attached to the sodium and the sodium chloride molecules, so that you can extract the bad things, so to speak, and then at the same time you're imploding so much of that carbon that you're releasing the hydrogen molecules that are all around it, and it starts taking it and making it into hydrogen gas, so to speak, and then you can take that through the system, and then you pump that back down into the seawater, whereas you've caught all of the carbon itself, and butyl is just a hydrocarbon. But anyway, you take it and you separate each little piece there, and then at the end of each reactants, you have a different stage where each of these structures are taken apart and placed in another area, a holding area, until they can be completely cleaned up to the point of being, you might have a degasser, and you might take out the chlorine in the essence of being a chlorine bleach, for an example. And you would have a lot of chlorine there, and you would have other areas where you would have hydrogen gas accumulators and just various things. But at least you'd be taking apart these pollutants, and because in their individual elemental forms, they're kind of everywhere in the earth, but they don't cause as much damage to humans and animals as they do in the PCB state.
Very interesting. I like that you're kind of, trying to clean it up. I've done a little bit of some environmental remediation myself and worked with some PCBs and some PCEs and stuff, and I know that those are always never that fun to clean up, so it's kind of cool that you've kind of created somewhat of a way to neutralize them and collect them.
Yes.
Do you see that this technology being able to be utilized in any other way in the future? Are you working on any new projects with this? Or are you sort of kind of just trying to take this product to where it goes and start to allow everybody to be able to utilize that technology clean?
Like any technology, you have to have a market for your primary technology. And for example, my primary technology right now is gold recovery units. Actually, metal recovery units, like I said, platinum, silver, the platinum groups. Worked with some other items like that, but that is the main function right now. And then when you get money flowing, and then you can have a little bit of research and development money, you can go a little further with each thing. And nothing is ever a finished product, in the sense that if there's something else you can think of, you can always accomplish it somehow. And that's what I work on. Is there's so many things out there that are undiscovered. Who would have thought that I would be talking on a smartphone when I remember as a child only having 4 digits on our phone, and a rotary phone, and you digit 4 digits, and we didn't have very many people in town, and I could walk to school 10 miles in a snowstorm both ways uphill, that kind of thing. But nowadays we have smartphones and no more of those antiquated phones. So things are not just static. Life is dynamic, and so we'll always find something to go further with. It might even come to be that we might use the ultrasonic. They have ultrasonics for communications, for an example. We have ultrasonics for pressure testing on jet engines. There's all kinds of uses for everything. They even tried ultrasonics on fusion generation of electricity, and so there's a lot out there that still hasn't been discovered yet.
Okay, nice. That's a very good point. I like that. So let's get into a little bit more of while you're working here. Like when you go out to, say, the bush, or to go do some gold mining if you're in Central America or South America or Canada, typically how many hours would you say you would work during a given week? Everybody looks on those gold mining shows, and it always looks like tough work. Does that end up actually being the case?
Besides having my own company, I also work for another company. I won't mention their name, but I work typically 70 hours during a 6-day work week. We don't work on Sundays, and I go into town and do my laundry and grocery shopping and such like that, and have a day off, and I work 70 hours a week, 11 hours a day for the basic day in the mining industry, and then I spend about a half hour, sometimes an hour, doing paperwork and fuel and preparation for the other crew to get there, and so that they can just start off and do their job. And
what would you say that you enjoy? Oops, sorry. Go ahead.
I'm the lead man.
Okay, so yeah, you've been doing that for about 42, 43 years, you said?
Yeah.
Very nice. And what would you say that you enjoy most about your work?
The mystery. The mystery.
You never know what you're going to find.
Oh, you never know what you're going to find. You never know what the next day holds. You might. I've come across old diggings and found old bottles, and after watching what the old timers did in their drifts, able to find out that, hey, over here's a hot spot, and these guys really, they put in a lot of physical labor, and so they weren't going to waste their labor on just taking the whole creek out. They focused on one spot, so we focus on those spots as well. But the mysteries are every day. It's a different challenge every day, and gold mining has always been a mystery to me because of seeing how many people have ideas as to the helical layout. When I talk to people that aren't familiar with gold mining, I tell them, do you realize that gold goes uphill? And they all, no, it's heavy, it's so heavy, it's always going downhill. But if you think about it, that's why we have sluice boxes with riffles, is because the gold comes over in the vortex and goes up underneath of that riffle, and it goes uphill under that riffle, and it stays there. So that's just one way of thinking about it. But finding the gold and what it does is always a mystery as well. Every time you take a pan, I'm finding other things like beautiful dodecahedral garnets and many other little things, little pieces of cassiterite, ilmenite. I just follow the whole pan, and I pick out the rocks as I'm panning, but I also have to make sure it goes through the recovery plant.
Now, what would you find most challenging about your work, and why would that be the most challenging?
Well, the most challenging about my work is I can't be in two places at once. I'm in the cut, and I'm following the channel of the cut, but we also have to haul the material to the recovery plant. And the recovery plant sometimes is half a mile away or so, and I can't be in both places at the same time. I can't see how well the plant is working, so I have to rely on my operators to maintain everything in that area, and so I just have to accept that. It is a challenge, but the challenge is I've trained them well enough that they know exactly what's expected, and as I'm doing that, I explain to them other factors that I'm doing so that they can see when we need more water and when we don't, and such like that. But my what changes do I think I would make to make it less challenging? Being in both places at one time.
So speaking about your employees and your staff, the guys that you have to train up, what do you usually look for in a young professional when you're considering them to come to work for you?
Well, most of the young professionals that are, well, for example, a lot of the geology and the engineering students that are coming out of the university up there, they're looking for jobs, and most of those young professionals go to like the Fort Knox gold mine, which is just about 15 miles out of Fairbanks, and they go there and do their in-between semester work out there so that they can get there first. So a lot of our young professionals are in the business, but they always seem to be gravitating more towards the big mining corporations rather than the small ones. But there are a few that come out there, and I look for somebody that's willing. If they're willing to sweep the floor, or if they're willing to shovel a little bit of dirt out from underneath the recovery plant, anything that they're willing to do, if they have a good work ethic, that's what I'm looking for.
So what is one of the most influential impacts on you during your career, or who had the most influential impact on you?
The person that had the most influential impact on my career, like I said, my grandfather had the greatest influential impact on my choice of career, as I said before. But during my career, my influential impact would have to be a former partner. And he was more influential. He had a temper. He was agitated. He didn't want any help doing anything. And he would try it until he'd just get flustered and start throwing tools. And then he would come over to me and he'd say, "Okay, it's your turn." And I would go over there, and most of the time he'd have it pretty close, and I would just be the one that put it in place. And I had longer arms, or more dexterous fingering of the nuts and bolts or whatever. But outside of that, yelling and screaming, he always reminded me that he was yelling and screaming at the air and not me, and that I was doing a good job. Kind of the Pavlovian theory, you might say.
What was the biggest lesson or the greatest lesson that you took away from him? Was it just to, no matter what happens, to end up, be kind to everyone around you, or what would you say was the biggest lesson?
The biggest lesson I learned from him was that he was always interested in what I thought about any situation we were in. What do you think? And that, to me, was, I need to promote that idea with everybody that I have any dealings with as their superior or supervisor or whatever. And I think that is the biggest thing that I came away with, is that he was always interested in what I thought. And most of the time we implemented it. Like I said, he wasn't, it didn't bother him at all. Didn't make him feel any lesser of a human being or anything else if he asked me. And some people won't ask because they believe that if you have something that they don't have, it will be a bad mark on their life or something like that. I don't know. I try to always treat people fairly, and that was the thing that he did, was he treated me fairly.
I like that. It's a very, very good takeaway. Now, let's pretend you're back here. It's your first day entering the workforce again. Pretend you're going all the way back to 15, 16. What is something that you would tell yourself now that you wish you had learned, or you wish you had known back on your first day?
If I had known certain things, I would tell myself, okay, if I went back in a time machine and I could leave a note to myself back then, I would just have to say, take the plumber's advice. The plumber, he tells you everything coming down the sewer goes downhill, and don't chew your fingernails.
All right. So tell me about what you believe was a failure and sort of how that impacted your progress moving forward.
I think that failure would actually be not moving forward. And I have had little setbacks here and there. For an example, my life, equipment breaking down, and you need this and this and this to happen with that particular piece of equipment, and it broke down, so you have to stop and fix it. It's been a setback, but if you just stopped and didn't start it again or didn't repair it, that would be a failure. And I don't think I've failed at anything in my life. I've slowed down a few times, and other times I've stopped for a moment, but I started back up again.
Oh, I like that. That's very good. So now, speaking of failures on the opposite spectrum, what was your favorite moment where you had just professional success in the industry? What would have been your favorite moment? Was it the 5-ounce nugget? Was there something more? Was it creating your patent for your device?
I think the biggest moment with me is the moment that I had the idea to start working on the device. And sometimes something happens that causes you, they say necessity is the mother of invention. I wonder who the father was. That's the kind of thing that you think of when you say, this idea in my mind comes from the need to catch the smaller particulates of gold. For an example, a duplex jig, you capture gold down to a certain size, but then you go scoop up a bunch of your material that come out the other end, and you realize that if you do certain testing like aquaresia or this and that and the other, you find out that there's still quite a bit of gold that went past all of your best efforts. And like I said, the mining industry is not regulated by the government. The mining industry is regulated by the owner who looks at the bottom line. And when we look at the bottom line and we say, well, I need another jig on the end of that jig, or I need a table out there coming off the end of the jig. And you're slowing your processes down so you're not capturing as much of the initial material through, and so your flow is slowed down, and so therefore the amount of volume of material is slowed down. Your gold is less because you don't have as much material, and so on. And the moment that I thought, why slow the material down?
Hey,
You run it through.
Pardon this 15-second interruption. As we know, humans are tainting the water, and the technology we use to produce GeoWonk's Rock Talk podcast has had a moment of interruption. Now back to the show.
What do you find that drives you during your particularly long days and harsh work schedule? Like, what makes everything at the end of the day worth it for you?
Everything that happens during any day, some days are longer than others. They seem to be, but it's still the same amount of time. But things that drive me forward when time seems to be slipping away is that when I'm in the equipment singing, you would never hear me singing, but I sing. And I'm a rock and roller, so that's what I do.
All right.
Anyway.
Now, let's say that you saw an unsafe activity going on by one of your crews. What is one thing that you've witnessed, and what did you do about the situation?
In my position, when I see anybody doing something in a unsafe manner, I go back over and I talk to them and explain to them what they're doing wrong, but what they're doing right as well. I expound on the positives is positively reinforced by telling them you're doing a good job, but this is a safe practice in this way, so let's think about doing it properly. And I find that speaking mano a mano, if you will, works better when you have no emotional context with it, not condemning somebody for doing something that's wrong, but you're explaining to them that this would be a better way of doing it. It would be less dangerous. And I think that works.
I like that. I can agree with that. That sounds like the way I would handle my business as well. Now, what do you feel is one of the most important professional attributes? Like, which attribute of somebody do you strive them to bring to work with them every single day? And what is one habit that you think everybody should be practicing from day one in their career to retirement?
I think from day one in their career, everybody should think about what can I do to benefit the company and benefit my fellow team members. Because if we come to work and we don't benefit the company, then we really don't benefit anybody else, because somebody's got to go if the bottom line says that, we're not seeing enough production and we're not seeing enough application of skills. We're seeing problems arise in that area. Then we have to talk to those people and promote coming to work every day with a smile, coming to work knowing that everybody else out there might have had a bad night, they might have had a grizzly bear encounter. There's so many things that can make for a person's day, and if I can be part of smiling when I see them come to work, and smiles are infectious, and talk to people man to man if they happen to be a man or a woman, man, woman, or but you talk to them as though they are sentient beings and that they are capable of performing their duties.
Now, if somebody was just starting out their career, what would you tell them to avoid doing?
I would tell them to avoid if you can learn from someone else's mistake, that's the best avoidance that you can have. And if someone else is saying, I did that one time and the result for this and this, then I think you've helped them along quite a bit. But something that I would tell them to do is be early and be there. And when they're early and they're there, they're not elsewhere in their mind. They're not thinking about the girlfriend that they saw last night or whatever. They're thinking about the work. Then things go a lot better. Their focus is the thing I would tell them to do.
I like that answer. Now, about you said you have two companies that you do, and you have one that you work for. So you can pick, which one of these you'd like to kind of use for this answer. But when it comes to the perception of the company you work for or one of your companies, what is one of the things that you're most proud of?
One of the things I'm most proud of is interaction with others, no matter whether it's the company I'm currently working for or my own company. Customer service is key, and employee interaction is another. I think that when we stop treating everybody as something that would bring money to me and start treating them as they didn't just happen to ask a question to me and expect some strange answer. They ask a question expecting a good answer. So if we treat everybody with respect and show them how we perceive things or our ideas. And if they mention an idea, we don't cut them down for their ideas, because everybody has ideas, some ideas and ideologies, you might say, or maybe different from yours, but when we show them that we're still listening, even though they're different than us, then they start building a rapport with you, and whether they're a customer or whether they're an employee, it matters not. They're still finding that they're being respected as a human being.
So, what is your favorite part about geology and just kind of studying the Earth? What would you say is just the most fascinating or most interesting part that you wish you could spend more time studying?
Well, you may have noticed that I got today's question wrong, but yet I have seen the same sheen that particular rock that we were discussing earlier today, and going through the testing, and it had titanium on the outside of it was the titanium ore that we'd found. And I think that not having the right answer sometimes makes me think more that some things are more similar than what we see at first glance. Everything we see in minerals, for example, when I find a garnet, a dodecahedral garnet, and I'm seeing it, and then I see another piece that looks very much similar to it, but it's not even a garnet. And that makes me wonder, well, did they come from the same area in our cut? Did they, there's variations of a theme. It makes you wonder about deeper down into the earth where they came from and what it's like down below. And so that's when we usually start drilling. And like I said before, it's the mystery. You never know. Some things, it's a garnet, sometimes it's not.
I can agree with that. There's lots of cool rocks and everything out there, and yeah, there's a lot of things where I see it and I'm like, oh, this is what it is, but everything in geology is not as it kind of seems, and I think that's one of the things that I actually really enjoy about it as well. Now, how does your wife and your family take when you go off to go mining, say, for 5 months out of the year? Is that tough on them? Is that strenuous for you guys, or have you guys just worked out such a good system now? It just kind of goes like clockwork.
Well, back in the day, back a long time ago, my family came with me out to the mine. We stayed out at the mine. That was no big to do, and my son used to love to sit up on the bulldozer with me and on like the little 550 John Deere, and not the big D9, but he'd love to sit up there, and we're gold miners, or he would love to go over and pan with me, and when we had cleanups, he would love to be there to look through the dirt, and we'd find little pieces of clear crystals, and we would put them in a jar, and we had a lot of fun. And now my wife and I were empty nesters, and she goes and visits the grandchildren, and I go to work, and then she meets me halfway through the season, and we have our time together for a while, and then she has to come back and do business and stuff down here, away from the mine, and so we're not apart that long, it seems to go better. And then nowadays, with the availability of being able to drive 4 or 5 miles up to the top of the hill where I'm in cell range, it's not so bad because I can talk to her in the evening. And the hardest part is actually the dogs.
I can understand that. So how many kids do you have?
Well, she has 2 and I have 1, and we have.
Do you ever pass down your gold mining knowledge? I feel like, you seem like quite an interesting man, and you got a lot of cool stories. I'm sure that your children are lucky and are able to get some of this knowledge firsthand. Is that something that they are interested in learning now as they've gotten older, or have they taken more of a different path in life?
Well, for the most part, hair grooming for the girls, and the boys have taken up other professions, but even in their professions, they, like, for example, my profession isn't the same as my father's. My father was in the Texas Businessmen's magazine 10 years in a row as being one of the top 10 businessmen in Texas. And he was in that, and he worked all the way up until 2 months before he passed away, and he passed away at 90, and he was still working, and he was doing it more so than I do. He had a computer, and he would have his pajamas on and a white shirt and a tie, and he would sit down in front of that camera. He worked from home after that, and he'd still be telling everybody what to do. And amazing man.
Do you see yourself kind of taking the same path where you're gonna just be working until the time has come, or do you have some retirement plans here where you plan to take off and just go enjoy life without work?
All of my brothers do the same thing. They're retired, but they're not retired. They both went back to work doing various things, and they're not retiring, and they have more time to do other things with their grandchildren and such like that. But I think that I'm gonna. Life is a mystery, and I like to delve into the mystery of it. And I think I might slow down somewhat. I've been thinking about doing some other work with some other companies with my exploration and everything else. I've thought about going out for, some of the bigger corporations and doing some of their exploration during the year and making it to where I could be closer to my wife at night, But still, all in all, I think I'll work until I can't.
Now, have you ever considered and just switching up career paths totally, or what about maybe treasure hunting? Have you ever thought about maybe taking a summer and kind of just going out and doing something fun like that?
Oh, I have done that in my life already, and we have a dear friend that my son and I, we'd go out to Arizona, and we'd go out to the Gold Bar mine out in Arizona. Some friends of mine own it, and we'd go out there and we'd take him, the family friends from Germany, and the longest dirt road he had ever seen in his life. And we got pictures of that, and we dug around out there and found gold, and we had a wonderful time and adventure as far as just taking the time to do it, and I enjoyed that. But I think as I get older, I'm going to spend more and more time in, like I said, trying to get the ultrasonics into more applications and working with the pollutants and such, and also getting more and more people involved in it, because I believe that if you can, some of the mining I've done in my life has been, I was the 5th batch of miners that worked that ground. The very same ground. They started out in the 1902, and then in 1910 they came back, in 1927 they came back, 1948, and then 54, and then it was us. And and it was quite exhilarating to actually find out that they left a bunch, and then as it glaciates in the wintertime, the streams break up, and pull more material down from the source, and you're always going to find gold there. But I think if we can get into more where we're capturing the finer and finer particulates of gold, one of the things that my machine has done, and I had some gold or some samples that needed to be processed to show these people. And I told them, I said, there's this particular show going to be on about the ultrasonic dental cleaning devices, and one of the men that I worked with in the ultrasonic company that makes the product for me, he was going to be there. So I told him, take your samples to him. So I took these samples that are very, very rich in ore. The gold was so much that probably in a handful of rocks, there was probably a half a gram easy in just a handful. And they're producing, quite a bit of gold per ton, but they couldn't break up the rock sufficiently enough to not use cyanide and other things, and they wanted to do something green, so I told him to take them there. He put it in the shot glass. He poured water into the shot glass, or a rocks glass, and he put the rocks in the rocks glass, and he stuck that inside of the ultrasonic dental cleaner that runs one of the same frequency ultrasonic technology inside. Within just 15 seconds or so, these rocks were crumbled up into mud, and all of the gold was down on the very bottom, and then all of the material, as its specific gravity laid it out, right up to the top of the glass. But it was just nothing but mud. They were awed by that.
That's pretty awesome, actually.
Yeah. And that's why I think that there's so many things that we can do with this technology, and I want to just keep pushing it to the brink. And then somebody else can come along after I'm gone and think about other things, maybe mining an asteroid with ultrasonic battering ram or something.
That sounds like something I would be interested in there. Like that one movie where they had to go onto the asteroid and mine through it or put in that bomb. I forget what movie that was from, but...
Yeah.
So, as a geologist, what is your favorite mineral or rock?
Except most of the time I have to say the one I'm holding in my hand at the moment. That's kind of funny. Because, I think my wife and I, we go to the rock shows and the gym shows and such, and we always stop by a booth where they have, look at this, they got a bunch of chalcopyrite. It's so beautiful. It looks like a peacock, And my friend that I told you about earlier, that he was my mentor, but he was also my business partner. He had a problem on another place where he was mining, and he kept having little tiny pieces of silver-looking material in there, and when he tried to pan it out, he wasn't getting anywhere with it, and he couldn't separate it only but by hand and tweezers and taking this. It was almost like spinel, but it was silvery, bright silver, and he couldn't figure it out. And then he took it into the gold buyer, and the gold buyer was giving him a dirty gold price. And he showed it to me, and he said, "Man, this is terrible. I'm getting a dirty gold price, but I can't get it out of there without taking each piece out." And I said, "Oh, I wouldn't take each piece out. I'd tell him you want all your silver back." And he said, "What is that?" And I said, "Well, those little pieces are silverite." And he said, "What?" And I said, remember when we were looking at electrum up there at this other friend's? Yeah, well, this is a little bit more on the silver side, and so I'm not seeing the yellow. We're seeing the silver, but it's 50-50, and just tell him you want your silver back." And after that, the gold buyer started, just chomping at the bit with him, and he said, "No, I want all my silver back." And he got bars of silver back, and he got a good clean price on the total assay, and it was clean gold from that point on.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
So this will probably be our last question here, Wendell, but I'd like to just ask you a financial one on the send-off here. If you could invest in one thing and there's something that you would think is a good idea for others to invest in, what would you choose?
Multiple choice or?
Sure. Yeah. What would your top 3 things be, or anything that you're sort of keeping your eye on that you think other people should be watching? Like, is it the new CBD industry and with all this hemp stuff that's going on, or is there something gold related or a metal that you think might be coming up, like some REE, some of the rare earth elements, or just what would you suggest for people to kind of keep their eye on and watch? Maybe 3D printing. It could be anything from anything, just something that maybe you've been paying a little bit more attention to, kind of trying to figure out when it's going to really make its break, and you think it has a decent potential to.
Well, I would say one of them would be hemp projects, because I believe that we have so many people talking about oil-based plastics and this and that and the other. I find that hemp has so much oil per acre that's amazing how much oil per acre the hemp plants can come up with, but also the fibers in the plant itself and making clothing and such like that, and the CBD oil, but also making plastics where we could have milk cartons that would disintegrate in the sunlight and would turn into basically fertilizer for the next crops that they come along. It might be wildflowers, you never can tell, and such like that. And I think that hemp-based agriculture and such like that, I'd like to see people investing in that for sure, because there's so much that could be made out of it, from it, and we don't have enough people investigating it because for so long it was illegal. But George Washington grew hemp, and they make fibers out of it for ropes for ships and this and that and the other. And also, I'm not a tree hugger and environmentalist, but I am concerned about things that just go awry when people have a complete disdain for the environment. As a miner, we put back the ground and we reclimate and we do all things like this, and there's seeding and we have forests again and such like that. But I think the environment, on some of it, harsher chemicals and stuff that have just been dumped, and putting them in a plastic 55-gallon drum and sticking them inside of a mountain somewhere, someday that plastic's going to rot, corrode, whatever. Who knows? It might have a chemical reaction with the chemicals that are inside of it, and it might leach into the groundwater. I'd like to see those cleaned up. I'd like to see things along that line. But I don't believe that that investment should come from the government or regulation, hyper-regulation, or anything like that. I believe that the free market, people get tired enough of it, and they start spending money in the right way in their investments. I think they'll come out better in that, along that line. And of course, there's always gold mining. There's investing in gold and such like that, because one of the things that people need to remember, the economy is not formed by people pushing pieces of paper around. Economy has to be mined or grown. That's how we make money. And
I like that answer. That's very good. I especially like the whole. I've been a big advocate for hemp for quite some time now, and I agree with. There's tons of great possibilities, and especially with the ability to make those plastics kind of that'll just turn into fertilizer, like you were mentioning. I think that's one of my goals. I'd love to see kind of happen into fruition, and to sort of change the way that people feel the environment, which I feel like was kind of one of your points there. Is you wanted people to care enough to where they invested their own money, and I think that's a great point. I think something that everybody should be focused on is helping to change sort of the way that we all view waste and we all view the environment, to kind of keep it all cleaned up. And
right.
I definitely think that's a big factor. And I also like that, your point about the economy is very true. In terms of metals and mining, what do you think is the next big thing? I know a lot of people are starting to realize the value of things like lithium or some of the bastnite, the rare earth elements, and how useful they are in modern technology. And I feel like a lot of people kind of don't even really know about those unless you're sort of in the industry related. How do you feel about those types of metals, and do you feel like anything like that would be a worthy investment?
I do. I think things like that would be a very good. For example, I know several mining companies. I won't mention names, not in for the commercialism of it, but I think that there are plenty of mining companies. If people just read the trades papers on the mining industry, they would see that there are a lot of companies looking for those rare earths, and there are people that are looking for them, and there are a lot of things that people don't know they can be utilized for. And the more they find, the more the people start seeing, like I said before, necessity is the mother of invention, and it would be a good idea to start delving into companies and investing into companies that are looking for those type of things. And I read an article the other day how they're taking rare earth elements out of waste material from a mining industry. And I thought, well, hey, that's pretty good, And they're doing it with bacteria. And, I look at things from a holistic viewpoint rather than just a straight-on fact sometimes. There's a rock. Yes, I know that's the fact, but how did it get there? Or what is it made of? And other things. What can I do with it? And how can I take it apart and utilize it? I think people worry too much about destruction rather than utilization. Utilization of things, recycling, aluminum cans, such like that, glass bottles. We have that going on right now, but they don't realize that there's old waste dumps out there that could be reutilized and more brought out, and I think that there's so much out there that people don't see the forest for the trees, but I think that they should do due diligence in looking for an investment in any field, but see the possibilities. And any company that wants to promote a product should show possibilities to their investors. They just found this great big huge lithium mine down in Argentina, and now they found more lithium in Nevada and such. And I think that there's elements out there that are waiting to be discovered, and that's what I think about investing.
All right, that's very good knowledge there. I guess one more question for you here, sir. In terms of waste reduction and recycling, is there anything that you would, from your experiences, that that your everyday person can sort of jump out and help? And what is something that you think we could all just do a little bit better that you've noticed that could make such a big impact if we all just do a little bit?
I think what my father once told me, he says, you want to change the world, change your mind first. And if we start working on habits like you go to the shopping store and you get these plastic bags to carry your groceries home in, take those plastic bags and put some of them in your automobile. And when you're driving around and you have something in your automobile, don't just chuck it out the window and put it in the plastic bag so that you can eventually recycle the whole deal. And when you get home, you take that bag out, put a fresh one in there, and you recycle that way. And another way is if you happen to be out on a walk and you see some garbage, pick it up. Don't wait for somebody else to pick it up. Don't say, well, somebody shouldn't have done that. Yeah, they shouldn't have done that, but you're here, pick it up. And it's not all about me, it's all about us. And anything I can do that makes it cleaner, then I will do it. And that's what we have to do. We have to start changing people's customs and their minds and their thoughts as to what they want to see in life.
I love that answer. Yeah, recently myself have been trying to start up what I like to call the 10-piece challenge, where the goal is for everybody to go out and pick up 10 pieces of trash per day. And just thinking about how many people, if we could get to do that, even if it's only 1,000, and they all actually picked up 10 pieces of trash for 30 days, you think all of a sudden now we're looking at 300,000 pieces of trash. And I think it's important to think about what you just said and the fact that it's not just about me, it's about us. And just that little bit of effort, if done by a lot of people, can make such a big impact. I really like that response. So I think that's a great note to kind of finish on, and a great takeaway when it comes to keeping everything sort of more beautiful for this planet. And
yes.
I wanted to thank you, Wendell, for taking your time out here to kind of do this interview with me. I think you are a very wise man.
Rock Talk, the podcast, is produced by GeoWonks. Go to geowonks.com and join the community.